Well, while Germany was being removed from power and they were surrendering, we had our other issue in the Pacific with the Japanese. And it was becoming more and more clear as the United States began its operations of merging and then island hopping towards Tokyo. We were winning there. Okay. But several big things had to happen. First and foremost, in the fall in early winter of 1944, the United States Marines and Navy engaged Japanese forces in the Philippines in the late Gulf. And they, over the course of several weeks, massive battles, mass casualties on both sides, eventually removed the Japanese from the Philippines. Um, the Japanese suffered immense casualties. They lost an immense amount of warcraft. Now, the United States wasn't without its suffering either. We just inflicted far more damage on them to where they eventually cried uncle. As part of our strategy to move closer and closer to mainland Japan, the United States designated the island of Iwo Jima as being a necessary target so that the United States can build an airstrip reasonably close to the Japanese mainland that could supply planes or otherwise should the United States invade Honshu, mainland Japan. So the island of Iwo Jima was deemed as being a necessary target. Problem there are over 21,000 Japanese combatants there defending it. It was a rocky outcrop, lots of volcanic ash. It would be a very difficult place to take. But the United States Marine Corps deemed it as being a necessary target to obtain an advantage should a mainland Japanese invasion occur. So, beginning in February of 1945, massive amounts of United States Marines and a few Army soldiers, by the way, invaded the beaches, the volcanic ashy hill beaches of the island of Iwo Jima, uncovering massive amounts of Japanese defenses that were dug in deep. Japanese pillboxes, Japanese armaments, caves, booby traps, all kinds of different things. And over the course of several weeks, the United States military would eventually overwhelm a Japanese force that really had no way to resupply themselves. They had no food. They were surrounded on all sides. Americans had complete air superiority. It was inevitable that we were going to win this thing. It would just be a matter of when and how. And it would cost a lot of American lives. About 7,000 American men died at the Battle of Iwo Jima. As a matter of fact, there is a very famous war memorial statue depicting 6 United States Marines raising up the American flag at the top of Mount Suribachi on the southern end of Iwo Jima. It's a very famous depiction, and the Marine at the base of the flagpole is a gentleman from my hometown. His name is Corporal Harlan Block. I played all of my Little League baseball games at Harlan Block Park, which is named in his honor. When that picture was taken in March of 1945, he was killed roughly about a week later. Okay? So he died at the Battle of Iwo Jima, but he will be permanently memorialized with the statue of raising the flag. You can see it on the next slide. The gentleman at the base of the flagpole is Corporal Harlan Block from my hometown of Weslaco, Texas. Otherwise, though, after very bitter fighting, the United States causes about 21,000 Japanese casualties. We basically wiped them out. It came at a pretty heavy cost. They never really had a chance. That would lead us to another island north of there, Okinawa, even closer to the United States mainland. If the United States takes Okinawa, we'll be even closer to a staging point for an invasion. Japan, by this point, has seen so many casualties and such destruction of its military, they're basically resorting to last measures. And one of the Japanese tactics was to sacrifice themselves. If you know you're going to die, you might as well go out with your guns blazing, in this case, literally. The adaptation of kamikaze comes into play here. Where if you're a Japanese pilot, you don't have any armament, you're running low on fuel, you know you're probably going to die, why don't you just go ahead and try and fly right into an American aircraft? Commit suicide, but you're going to go out with a blaze of fire. Go out in a blaze of glory. That's Japanese kamikaze mentality. And that was going on around this time in the Pacific Theater as Japan saw the inevitable. They've endured mass casualties. Their military is starting to become virtually wiped out. Now, the United States engages in an act of bombing Tokyo, kind of test the waters to see what a mainland bombing plan would look like. It caused mass casualties within that. One of the things we realized, though, is that in order for Japan to officially surrender, something more drastic would have to happen. In old Japanese samurai culture, there is no such thing as surrender. And that applied to the Japanese civilian population as well. In order for Japan to surrender, we would have to invade mainland Japan. By invading mainland Japan, citizens would invariably take up arms. So if the military would be defeated, the government wouldn't admit defeat and their people would take up arms. I would hope the United States would do the same thing. Should we be ever invaded, should that time ever come, I would hope that the American population would take up arms and defend our ways. That's how Japan would have done it. You had to capitulate. You had to force their hand. So several different things were going on around this time. I mentioned a few slides ago that America was making mass technological advantages. And they had all kinds of different things in the works, including some European scientists on the American side who were experimenting with various different energies, if you will. And the United States government commissioned the Manhattan Project, which is a $2 billion scientific and technological effort to develop an atomic bomb. Okay? It was thought that hopefully we wouldn't have to use it. But should Japan refuse to surrender, we wanted to at least have it ready in the event that something worse would happen. In July of 1945, the United States experimented in the New Mexico desert by exploding our first atomic bomb. And it was the first atomic event in world history. The advent of the nuclear era is now upon us. Now, by this time, Franklin Roosevelt had a cerebral hemorrhage. He had a brain hemorrhage, and he died in April 1945, not that long after he was inaugurated for his fourth term. Having placed Harry Truman as his vice president by law, Harry Truman would become president. So in April 1945, Harry Truman becomes president of the United States. And immediately, he is thrust not only with the instant defeat of Germany and cleaning up Europe after results of the German destruction and the Holocaust, but now he turns his attention to Japan. And in the summer of 1945, Harry Truman delivers Japan an ultimatum. Stand down, surrender, or face dire consequences. Japan was not going to surrender. Their people would not accept surrender. Their people would take up arms against American forces invading them. So, it was determined that in order to defeat Japan, in order to force their hand, we would have to drop an atomic bomb to really send the message through. On August 6, 1945, the American bomber, the Enola Gay, takes flight from the Central Pacific and drops the first of 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima, instantly causing 80,000 deaths. The first use of an atomic bomb as a result of conflict is now used. 2 days later, the Soviet Union, which had now been a part of the defeat of the Nazi army, can now turn its attention on its old wartime rival, Japan. August 8th, The Soviet Union declares war on Japan. Still no surrender. August 9th, the United States decides to drop the second of two atomic bombs, this time on Nagasaki, causing roughly 100,000 deaths. 5 days later, Japan signs down, or they stand down, and in early September they sign a formal surrender agreement. The war is over. The question becomes, did the United States do the right thing by bombing the Japanese with atomic weapons? That's a good question for you to ponder. Did we do the right thing? In order to get Japan to surrender, U.S. forces and other Allied forces would have to invade mainland Japan, causing perhaps millions of casualties on both sides. Japanese people were going to take up arms. The government would not surrender. The people would not surrender. There would potentially be billions, or rather millions, in death. Or we could drop a bomb, send a message, and kill a couple 100,000 of them. Neither one is a good option. Neither one is good. It's just one is the lesser of two evils. We're going to force their hand before a long-term destruction carries on. So, we dropped the bombs and decided for the lesser mass casualty option. As awful as that sounds, that was the rationale behind dropping the bombs at the time. We bombed Japan with the atomic bombs to force their hand, and we caused fewer casualties, believe it or not, by dropping atomic bombs than via a mainland invasion. There's no good option there. But then again, there's no good option in war. People are going to die. In this case, fewer people died than otherwise. That was our rationale at the time. Maybe your time to discuss and research the reasons and rationale behind dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But it did force their hand. They did surrender. Now that Germany and Japan are both defeated, the war is over. We've won. But what are the costs? The cost of World War II is that it's the deadliest war, by far, in world history. Keep in mind, World War I was seen as being the Great War, the war to end all wars. Not even close. World War II saw mass death. About 14 million combatants died. Between the Axis powers and the Allied powers, 14 million combatants died. Of which, about 400,000 American men died. 700,000 were wounded as a result of the action. That's still only a drop in the bucket compared to the whole total, especially when you consider civilian casualties. Because between Europe and the Pacific Theater, about 50 million Europeans and others in Japan died in civilian casualties as a matter of World War II. So you have roughly 60 to 65 million combatants and civilians die as a result of World War II. Other untold amounts of wounds and illnesses or other things that went on too. Mass destruction. War is awful. But if you're going to fight a war, fight to win it. That's what we had as a mentality in World War II. That was our production effort. Women playing a vital part, immigrants playing a vital part, people putting their sacrifices together to help the war effort. The brave folks who served in the European and the Pacific Theater to defeat the Nazis, to free the Jews, to defeat the Japanese army who deliberately attacked us. That was a massive war. What next? What comes as a result of World War II? Next chapter.